This is the Amor al Migrante podcast, Love for the Migrant, a project of Estrella del Paso, the largest provider of free immigration legal services in West Texas and southern New Mexico. This podcast is coming to you from El Paso, Texas, hosted by Sandra Ramirez and Cristian Trujillo. Please subscribe to the Amor al Migrante podcast to be alerted about new episodes and visit www.estrelladelpaso.org to support our work on the southern border. Hello and welcome to another episode of Amor al Migrante. I'm Sandra Ramirez. Today we are bringing you inside of Estrella del Paso to some of our busiest units. These are the units that deal with clients who have removal or deportation orders. They also deal with asylum seekers. You'll be hearing a lot, or you've likely been hearing a lot in the news about asylum seekers. So we're hoping today our listeners will get a better idea of how that process works. Here to talk to us about that is Hannah Rule. She is the managing attorney in our removal defense unit. Thanks for joining us today, Hannah.
Thank you, Sandra.
Hello, everyone, and I'm Cristian Trujillo, and today we'll also be hearing from Jackie Ramos. She's an orientation specialist in a legal orientation program, or as known internally as LOP. Their work primarily happens inside the ICE Detention Center, and these are the people who many of our clients meet before anyone else. Jackie will talk about what her role entails in a little detail. So we're going to start with Hannah. Hannah, so before we dive right into it, can you tell us what is asylum? What is that entails?
Yeah, so asylum is actually a very specific term of art in the legal community. Not everybody who comes to the U.S. seeking a better future or looking for even help and safety in the United States qualifies for asylum. Asylum is specifically for people who are scared of something that happened in their past. So they had past persecution, or they are fearful of future persecution, which essentially means they're afraid of bodily harm. They're afraid they're going to be killed for very specific reasons. So it's not just general crime that they've suffered. It's because specifically that they have suffered that persecution, or they're fearful of suffering bodily harm because of race, religion, political opinion, nationality, or because they're of a very particular social group within their community. So it's very hard as an attorney and talking with a lot of people who are extremely fearful of something that's happened to them in the past, but unfortunately they don't fall into those very specific categories to have a lawful asylum claim here in the United States.
Man, and when they arrive to the border, what is it the first thing like you advise to them? Like, like go to the officer or go to the app, or what is it that you...
Yeah, so typically when I personally am first encountering clients, they've already entered the United States. However, there is at this moment, the Biden administration has started the CBP1 app, which is essentially a scheduling application where individuals, family units can use the application themselves. The intention is that they don't need legal representation. They don't need attorneys to help them with this, specifically Spanish speakers or English speakers who can use the CBP1 app and present themselves to seek asylum at ports of entry and legally enter the United States through this application where they're showing up at a port of entry, they're going through the inspection process, and CBP1, that's why it's called CBP1. CBP1 will actually, CBP will actually either parole them into the United States, but they do a thorough background check and they look at their criminal record both in the United States as well as in their home countries. And either they will say they have, a pretty clear background and they'll parole them into the United States, or they may have criminal history, or they may have even past immigration history here in the United States, and that could cause them to be detained at the border, and usually they end up in one of our local detention centers.
And it's something that I want to point out, the fact that they do go through a criminal background, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So
yes.
A lot of people that you see on social media or on the news or outside in the street. Hey, sorry to interrupt. Enjoying this podcast? Just a quick reminder, in 2023, Estrella del Paso helped over 7,000 clients with nearly all of the cases being free. This early giving season, every bit of support helps us to continue this essential work. Don't forget to show your support by donating at estrelladelpaso.org or visiting our El Paso Giving Day page, link below. And that's all. Back to the podcast. They think that people are just coming over just like that, no background check, no nothing. They're entering the country just like that. But I do want to point out that they do go through a background check, and if they don't pass that background check, you said that they go through detention, right?
Yes. So of course, you know, these are individuals who are presenting themselves at the border. There are other people who are coming in through the river or in different ways. But absolutely, anybody who is what we call encountered by law enforcement, they are having background checks run, and they're looking both in the United States if they have a criminal history, but they're also looking at their home countries to see if they have a criminal history back home.
Super important to note, just that misinformation that gets spread really quickly. Right. So that's really good to know. So once they're inside those detention centers, Jackie, that's where you and your team comes in. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, our main goal and our main purpose is to give legal orientation. So it's just basically explaining these are your rights. This is what can happen if you go to court. This is what can happen if you don't make it to court. And that's really where we start. And well, that's also how we get to meet people and do orientations specifically for them. So we ask them about their specific case and knowing more of their background of what exactly they're seeking, be it asylum or any other type of asylum, like for example, Convention Against Torture Act. Then from there we can help them educate themselves a little better so they can also help themselves. So overall, we help them help themselves.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important program because a part of it is there's just, we as an organization, we as a city, even as a legal community, does not have the capacity to help every single person who enters an ICE detention center or who is paroled in or who needs that assistance.
Yes, in a perfect world, but we're a very small team and there's so many detained people that deserve a chance, and sometimes the only way we can do it is by doing the general orientation, which is in a classroom setting, and I think that really helps them to get an idea of like this can happen or this cannot happen.
Right. So you're equipping them with that knowledge to go through the process themselves if they need to. If worse comes to worse.
Of course, because a lot of people cannot afford attorneys. Attorneys are so expensive. Mm-hmm. So even just for them to understand, like, I have to do, for example, my own translations for court.
Right.
Or these are my rights in court. This is what I can expect is super, super helpful for them. And even for their families to understand, like, this is what my husband, my son, my daughter is going through.
Right. So you guys are also a bit of like the screening, right? The pre-screeners. So you decide, hey, this is a great case. We should consider taking it. And then you hand it over to Hannah and her team. Is that how that works? Or talk to us about how that works.
So I had mentioned a few seconds ago that we do orientations by themselves.
Yeah.
So that's where we ask them more in depth about their case. Why you left your country, you know, who's here, what's going on. And we do something called staffing. So in staffing, we just present the cases to Hannah and her other team. And we only do it if they have court. Because a lot of people, they think that everybody comes in and everybody has court right away. And it's not like that. There's a whole process within itself there. And if they have court, we present the cases. And, you know, based on their legal knowledge, they decide if they can take the case or if they cannot.
So basically, you guys are the first person they see after they have been detained, right?
Yeah, and we're actually
in like a legal setting, in like a
disclaimer. Yes.
Got it.
The first person they see as soon as they get across, Jackie, she's the one.
They're standing there at the border wall like this.
Kidding.
But I mean, we are the first people that they see that aren't ICE or CBP or even like the guards.
Right.
Yeah, we're literally the first people that they see that, you know, we have no legal authority in that setting. So that's also, I think, very relieving to them.
For sure.
Because like I said, we're the first people that like are not trying to, you know, get them deported sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, you don't work for the government.
Yeah, I don't work for the government. I don't work for the government.
Thank you, Jackie, for making that point clear. So let me ask you a question, Jackie, though. What are the things that you recommend for someone that had just been detained and is going to go through the orientation process with you? What is it that you recommend for to be like, you know, because I've heard like one of the things is like be really, really honest about like you and your background, but are there other items that you recommend for them to tell you or to do when having
Well, we cannot give legal advice, but most importantly, yes, tell the truth. You know, especially when you get to a judge. The judges were attorneys for a long time before they became judges. So they have an idea of, oh, this person might not be very truthful or they're exaggerating maybe their story. So it's just being honest because everything will be questioned. But one thing that I do tell them is just, it's very intimidating. Prepare yourself to be really intimidating. And it's not even that like they do it on purpose. For example, it's not like the judge's plan is to intimidate them.
Right.
But it's a very official, serious
setting.
Yeah, most people haven't been in that kind of setting ever before in their life.
Yes,
It's the first time they're sitting there, they have a translator going.
And everything's so fast. It's very
Right.
confusing. So it's just that. It's like prepare yourself to be very intimidated and to just answer with your truth. That's why you're here, is to tell your truth.
And you said that some people expect to get court dates right away and sometimes they don't. So in your experience, Hannah, I mean, how long does it take for an asylum case to even play out in the court system?
Yeah, so that's very, it definitely depends on whether they're in a detained setting or whether they're in a non-detained setting.
Got it.
It also really depends on what court they are in throughout the country. Because, of course, many people are entering here at the southern border, but then they're moving all throughout the country. So it just depends on whether the non-detained court is especially busy. Here in El Paso, the courts are actually move pretty quickly. So an asylum case, I would say newer cases, about a year to 2 years.
Wow.
And that's needed, really. It's really needed because people are trying to get evidence of what's happened to them from their home countries. We need time to translate documents. We need time to have them write their own declaration, which is essentially people pouring their heart and soul and story into, just a few words. And so making sure that it's really detailed and honest and really depicts to the judge everything that's happened to them or what they're afraid might happen to them if they return. So that's in the local area, it's a year, 2 years. In some of the other courts I've seen in Miami, court dates aren't out until, or in Boston, I had a former client that they don't even have court until 2026.
Wow.
Some of the courts are really far out, and they're just looking at kind of the difference between a hearing or a trial. They're just looking for like a basic hearing, like just their first hearing with a judge. Whereas the detention centers, they move a lot quicker because, of course, they don't want people sitting in detention centers for 2 years. So the judges really move those dockets along really quick. So they might have 2, 3, 4 court.
Yeah, and very general. In general, they do courts around every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks max. And usually it is for courts. But if the person asks for more time, or even if they have an attorney, then they can have more. So we can see people with like 8, or you can see people with 4. Just really depends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it also depends on languages.
You need translators.
Yes. So Jackie definitely first encounters people when they have something called a CFI process or a fear interview process. It's either a credible fear interview or a reasonable fear interview. She usually first talks to people before, or it's a total mix, but sometimes it's before, sometimes it's after, and sometimes they're waiting for the results. If they don't have what's called a positive fear interview, they won't even be seen by the court.
Oh, wow.
And so oftentimes people are shocked that they'll be coming to the detention centers and they're actually waiting up to 3 months just to have this interview before they even start the process in front of the judge.
And so that interview will determine if they even get to stay and present their asylum cases at all, if it's going to even be heard at any level.
By a judge.
Wow.
So, about your clients, like experiences you've had, right? I know it's tough, right? To say, you know what, you've been waiting for 3 months, but you did not pass a credible fear interview because of this and this, and you're on the other side, right? Like the positive side, were like, hey, you know what, I have good news. Now this is the next step. From experiences you had recently with clients, what is that something that comes top of your mind? Like, oh, you know what, I had this client and there was their process. This was the positive outcome. And this other client was the negative outcome.
So I actually had a great summer. I had 2 positive outcome cases.
Yay, love that.
And one of them was in the detention center, and then one of them was in the non-detained setting. And so those were situations where they were kind of that spectrum of how long the case is. One of them has been my client for
2 years.
Jackie was originally my legal assistant.
Yes.
So when he first started with me, she was my legal, like she did the intake for him.
Yeah, so like 2 years.
And you've been in LLP for over a year now.
Wow.
So that was at least about 2 years for his process. And he luckily had a positive asylum.
Great.
From the judge. And then my other client, I think she started in, I don't remember exactly when she was detained. I think I did the intake, and again, she could have been detained for months at this point. I think I did the intake in maybe November, December, and then the actual hearing wasn't until July. And that was really tough because detention centers are not easy places to live.
No, not at all.
And I know we mentioned, like, if you have a criminal history, you might end up in the detention center, but really it can be a spectrum. Like, not everybody in detention centers have criminal histories. I think this particular client may have had past immigration history, so maybe this isn't her first time in the United States, and so she's being detained.
Got it.
But it was so hard for her. You know, there's the asylum process, as Jackie was talking about, like, it's so stressful to be in front of a judge, to be in this process. It's emotionally draining, and to essentially be imprisoned while this is happening when you're not a criminal. You are legally trying to seek help from the U.S. government and do the process legally and correctly, and you present yourself, and you end up essentially imprisoned just for the judge to hear your case. And so that was the hardest part with that case, was my client was so incredibly ready to be released from detention, and we had to really struggle through. We need more time. We need more time to translate all the documents. We need more time to collect, Guatemalan police records, things like that, where it takes time to both receive them and then translate them. And so that was really hard with that case, but it had a positive outcome in the end, and she was reunited with family. So that was a really rewarding case where we were really worried.
It was a little scary.
It was scary there for a bit, but the judge did find in her, gave her a positive outcome in the end.
Nice.
What are those reactions like? Because I feel like that's something that would never get old. Is those outcomes? Like, no matter what the reaction is.
And this one in particular, one of the things that Jackie kind of explains in her general orientation is that there are different types of what essentially people call asylum. But there's asylum, there's withholding of removal, and then there's the Convention Against Torture. And so the judge can deny asylum, they can deny withholding of removal, but then they can grant the Convention Against Torture, which essentially doesn't have the same benefits of asylum, but you get to stay in the country, you get to have a work permit, and you're here. Basically, it's called an order of supervision. You get to stay in the country legally with an order from a judge. And so this particular client wasn't feeling very good about how the hearing was going with the judge. And so he said, I'm going to deny, because she has simultaneous interpretation in her headphones. The judge said, I'm going to deny withholding of removal, but I'm going to grant Convention Against Torture.
Okay.
And she had just this, like,
demeanor.
she thought everything was being denied.
Oh, no.
And I had to be like, Judge, she doesn't understand. She doesn't know what's happening. He goes, I know, I'm going to explain. And he, like, really walked it through it. And then she realized, and she just started crying. She was just so relieved and so happy. And he was like, we're going to go off the record. And he, like, turned off the tape. And then, so that was just such an incredible relief. I think we got her released maybe the same day, or the next day we got her on a flight to be reunited with her daughters. So
That's amazing.
yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, those are the most emotional days.
Right,
For
I
sure.
bet. And,
For
and
sure.
And I can imagine, because you put yourself right on their shoes. They travel thousands of miles, and they already suffer the country because they had crimes against them, or they suffered torture or something, right? They get here, and then they still have to go through the process of getting the CBP-1 app, right? They go through the CBP-1 app, their background comes positive, and then they meet you guys and still going through the court, and then still having to struggle through someone translating what the judge is saying.
Yes.
And like the way that they talk in Spanish or in other languages is so different the way that people
it's
translate.
so hard. That's one of the biggest learning curves is like every one of my clients is from a different country. And so I'm like trying to learn the slang of the different countries. And I'm like, the vacuna. And they're like, what are you talking about, a vaccine? And I'm like, the extortion. And they're like, yeah, extorsion. Why are you talking about a vaccine? What are you talking about?
Yes, especially with the interpreters because they translated like in very proper
Formal,
Spanish.
yeah.
Yeah, so if you say like vacuna, it's like literally they'll be like, oh, the vaccine. And it's not a vaccine.
That's intense. Yeah.
It's
Let's add
crazy.
another layer of complication to it. It's not complicated enough.
Yeah, so I could totally see your client be like, oh man, and then like hold on, let me tell you this is what's going on, right? So I know it's tough, and for people to understand that it's not an easy process.
Right.
It's not a granted process. It's not like let's open the border, everyone can come in and that's it. Yeah, no, it's a process that we have to follow. That it needs to be updated. It needs to be modified because when was the last time? 1986.
Yeah.
So
A major reform.
right. So everything has changed since 1986, right? iPhones weren't even here yet, right?
I wasn't even here yet in 1986.
I wasn't even born yet.
And we're still following rules from like 38 years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
And I think it's
that tells
important
something.
to also say, like, when people talk about immigration reform, that's exactly what they're talking about.
Right.
Is changing things from a billion years ago to 2024.
To apply now.
Exactly.
But that brings us to a really good question, because what do you think are some of the, and I'll kind of pose this question to both of you, are some of the biggest misconceptions about how the asylum process works from asylum seekers themselves about what they expect that process to be, and also from the public's understanding? Because I know we've seen a lot, even in terms of news coverage, where people, once they're in, asylum seekers will think, that's it. I have asylum. You let me in. I'm free to go. I'm clear. And then other people kind of have this idea of this open borders concept that we're letting everybody in and everybody's getting asylum. But along some of those lines or something different, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that the two of you see among the public and asylum seekers themselves?
With the asylum seekers, the first one is that it is really hard. It's really hard to fight a case. At least for people that are detained, they think, well, if they let me out, it'll be easier. It is easier in the sense that you're free, you're with your family, you're with your friends, but the judge is still going to ask you the same questions. It's the same paperwork, the same proofs that they're asking for. And that's really hard inside or outside, And I think just for people overall is something that I don't remember which one of you said it at the beginning, but it's that seeking asylum is super legal. It's not a crime. It's not a crime. Just in case, because
Internationally protected right.
yes, it is a human right. Anybody can do it. And that's like the big one, because from that's opens up like the whole concept of, who's at fault? The government, CBP, the states, and immigration reform.
There you go.
I think one of the ones that really bothers me that I hear a lot in the media recently is that people are coming in with no background checks or open borders. And every single actual client that I have, there's something, the best way to kind of describe it is like an arrest record, and it has their photo and it says where they were encountered. And they're running FBI background checks. They're running background checks in their host country, or sometimes it's even from they might have a criminal history in a third country that's not even their home country. It's not even the U.S. So to hear people saying or claiming that we don't know anything about these people, it's like, no, the U.S. government is doing very thorough,
Yes.
looking into these people very thoroughly. And if they have any kind of criminal history or anything like that, it's much harder to be released from detention.
Yeah, and it'll pop up also, because just to add to that, it's CBP does a background check, and then if you go to a detention center, then ICE does the background check. Everybody is doing background checks.
There are many different parts of the government, and all of them, even because even in your court hearing, then there's OPLA, which is DHS,
Yes.
and the government at that point, you have to get your fingerprints done, and even the government in the asylum hearing in front of the judge, one of the judge's first questions is, do you have any problems on a criminal background perspective. There's so many times that this is being looked into. And asylum in general is based on the judge's discretion. So if the judge just thinks, I don't think you're a good person, I don't think you deserve to have asylum here, the judge can just decide not to grant the asylum.
That's mind-blowing. I feel like there should be a checklist. You have met all of the requirements.
Yeah. They can meet all of the requirements, and then it's still
not having
judge's
granted.
discretion. No.
Man, that's insane.
The vibes were off, the judge said. Denied.
Right? Man, that's crazy. How just depending on one person, you can change the life of a whole family.
Yeah.
And like, you know, like you have to go back to your country, and man, the fear that person is gonna feel by getting those news, like, hey, you know what, you didn't pass because I don't feel like you're gonna be a good person here. So yeah, man, that's just.
And we can do a whole separate episode on the pressure that puts on you as an attorney, because we've had people on this team say the effort that I put into this, like whether I do this properly, whether I make sure I do everything right on my end, could determine if this person gets to stay here and be safe, or if they get returned and ultimately killed. And I'll never know what happened once they're removed.
Yeah.
To understand that kind of pressure when approaching a case is insane to me.
And it's absolutely something that people say to us all the time is, you don't understand. And I have to say, you're right. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I could never understand. I'm coming from such a place of privilege to even be trying to listen to your story. And the heartbreaking part is you don't understand. They're going to kill me. And me saying, I'm sorry, it's not under the law of asylum that I can take your case, that I can argue your case in front of the judge.
That's insane. And sad. So moving to the same direction, right? What are the things that you guys would like for people who seeking asylum to know, and for those who are just on this side of the U.S. also that like are against asylum, that what is it that you would like to tell them to know, right? Because you mentioned right now that you know, they go through 1,000 background checks, and I think that defeats the myth of like, yeah, we don't know who's coming in, because we definitely know who's coming in and what is it that they've done before, or what is it that they haven't done before. But what are things that you would like people to know about asylum?
You can go first.
I think that, you know, coming off of my last comment, it's really, really hard to seek asylum, and not just because your life is in threat doesn't mean that it's an asylum claim. And so that is absolutely the hardest part of just general conditions in a country, or crimes, especially gang violence. And it can kind of change throughout the country depending on the case law in different circuits. But especially here in the Fifth Circuit, if you are threatened by gangs, it's just extortion. It's just, you have a successful business, give us your money or else. People are really fearful for their lives for that, but that's not an asylum claim. And so that's one of the hardest parts, is people believing or having this perspective that I'm going to go seek safety in the United States. And if they get here, that's the hardest part. And it's just the beginning. That's what's really, really hard, is you have to take this whole process incredibly seriously and put so much effort into the case once you get here, and really show that it's not just, oh, my life is threatened, but my life is threatened for this particular reason. And it's within those 5 categories of asylum.
And that's it. Those are the only ones. And you said it was...
It's race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and particular social group. So particular social group is a bit of a catch-all. Usually I'm explaining it as someone who is from the LGBT community. So it's a group within society that is targeted for persecution for whatever reason. And it's a catch-all because it could be, you know, every society is different, every country is different. So that can definitely flex. But for the most part, it's race, religion, nationality, or political opinion.
Your turn. You're up, Jackie.
I think that was a big one. Like how we had both said, it's so hard. It's so hard to find a case. And even when you think, I have all of this evidence, everything is translated. This is saying that I will die the minute I land in my country. And there's still a big possibility of them losing.
Yeah.
You know, and it's really, really, really rough and sad because so many people really deserve the chance. But it doesn't happen because it's unfair. And that's like the big thing that, you know, we do tell people. Sometimes it's just like, this process is really unfair and it's horrible and it's hurtful and we cannot change the laws.
I think when we talk about immigration reform, people talk about it as this big picture thing, right? But in doing this work day in and day out, it's not that big of a picture, right? It's let's find a way to make these exceptions when they're necessary. Let's find a way to find alternate paths that don't exist there. We're limiting asylum to 5 categories. That's not sufficient. And you all clearly see day in and day out that those 5 categories are not sufficient. So let's expand that. Let's find more reasons and let's apply that expansion not only to asylum, but to everything else, right? To citizenship, to residency, to all of these things. Like, let's expand. That's what we mean by immigration reform. Let's create more ways they're not so limited. Because I think what happens, I was just having this conversation yesterday about someone who said these people have had someone who lost their job because they were undocumented, who've been working undocumented for decades. And this person said to me, the rest of us didn't understand why they didn't just fix their papers during all this time. And I said, because there was no path, because you have to meet very certain requirements. And if you don't even get a shot at applying, or you can apply all you want, but you're going to get denied. And now you've put a target on your back to say, hey, this is where I am. So I think that's what people don't understand, is there really is no way sometimes for people. And when you think about that as a individual person, a human being who you have met, who you've had conversations with, who you've talked to they've talked to you about their family or their children or their home. And now you have to have these very real conversations where you're like, there's nothing that the laws of this country will allow me to do for you.
Right.
Yes. And that's so rough because, you know, it's the court, then it's also USCIS, and then it's ICE. And everybody goes rogue. And everybody does different things and they don't talk to each other.
I know. I'll have to have conversations with clients and be like, it depends on the mood that day. It depends on which officer you have. It depends on if they had lunch early, if they're caffeinated enough. I can't predict what's going to happen. I can't. And really setting them up for all of the possibilities.
Right. If that doesn't tell us that we need an updated immigration reform, I don't know what else to tell us, right? I mean, just to have your life depending on a guy, if he had a good lunch and maybe the lunch wasn't good
or
enough.
A girl.
Or a girl too, right?
Yes. It depends on their vibe that day.
Right.
And if the vibe is off, it's not happening.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to go ahead and be deported. You're going to stay in removal proceedings. You're going to go ahead and just not go through your asylum case, right? So I think that's just one huge red flag, right? Yeah. Telling the government that we need an updated immigration reform with upgraded, I guess, decision-making guidelines for
absolutely.
that, right?
Yeah, I agree. Some more accountability there in terms of all of that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah and Jackie, for joining us today. That was a good conversation. I know that this is a very serious topic, but you guys presented it in a way that made it really easy to digest, because that could have been a very difficult conversation.
I know. I keep being like, do I sound like a lawyer? Wait, back up.
Coming from the comms department, you did it perfectly.
That's right.
I keep thinking, how much Gen Z lingo can I throw in?
Throw in there?
Yeah, Jackie, Gen Z translation for me.
Very demure.
Yes, I am a very demure, very mindful girly. My personality is based off TikTok for sure.
Perfect. Whatever the current trend is, right?
There you go.
We love that.
Exactly. So we just want to say thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to Hannah and Jackie for coming with us and being at the Amor al Migrante podcast. And you guys have anything to add?
No, thank you guys. It's great that you are starting this for our office and
it's
really
so
getting the news out about different issues that we all touch on, because all of our different teams, like, it's so great to have both Jackie and I here, because our teams are so related, but very, very different in what we do. And that's so true about all of our teams here at the office.
Yeah. And we have new podcast equipment, if you didn't notice. So the audio on these will be much clearer going forward.
Yes. So we just want to say thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you guys on the next episode of Amor al Migrante. Bye-bye.
Bye.
yo.